One day, Savannah Briggs, a mechanic with grease-stained hands and a worn-down truck, was thrown out of a luxury car dealership, humiliated and dismissed like she didn't belong. The next day, something incredible happened. Her ex-fiancé, the one who left her years ago, pulled up in a Rolls-Royce. But this wasn't just any Rolls-Royce. This was the beginning of something that would flip her world upside down. Savannah had always prided herself on one thing: she was no quitter. She'd spent years working in a small, dusty garage just outside of Mon, Georgia, fixing cars that most people wouldn't give a second look. She was tough, gritty, and always on her feet, working long hours to make ends meet. But on that fateful day, she wasn't looking to prove anything. All she wanted was a chance. She had been saving every penny for months. The repairs were becoming harder to manage, with her old truck breaking down every few miles. Her boots were worn thin, her hands permanently stained with oil, and her clothes never seemed to stay clean for long. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. And today, she was going to do something different. Today, she was going to try her luck at Holston Motors, one of the most prestigious luxury car dealerships in the state. Pulling up to the polished marble driveway, Savannah felt the weight of the moment settle over her. She wasn't here for anything fancy. She didn't need a shiny sports car. She just wanted something reliable, something that wouldn't stall every time she hit a red light. As she stepped out of her truck, she felt the stares. Her oil-streaked coveralls, frayed boots, and the dust on her face stood in stark contrast to the pristine cars on display in the showroom. But she didn't care. She had a goal: walking through the automatic doors. The cool air of the dealership hit her like a rush. She could see the polished cars gleaming under the showroom lights. But all she could think about was the rusted-out truck she had parked outside. The receptionist barely glanced up at her, eyes scanning over her worn boots and calloused hands before returning to her phone. "I'm here to speak to someone about a trade-in," Savannah said, trying to keep her voice steady, but she couldn't hide the slight tremble in her words. A man in a sharp navy blue suit approached, his demeanor as polished as the showroom floor. His name tag read, Chad. He barely looked at Savannah as he sized her up, his eyes lingering on her boots before he spoke. "Trade-in, huh? Not sure what kind of deal you're expecting, but we don't usually entertain." Before he could finish, Savannah spoke again, this time more firmly. "I just need something that runs. A car that won't break down every time I drive it." Chad's laugh was dismissive. "You think you can afford something from here? Look at you. This isn't the place for people like you." The words stung, but Savannah wasn't new to rejection. She'd faced it before growing up, working in the garage, and even when her ex-fiancé, Trent, left her years ago without so much as a second thought. But that day, something snapped inside her. She'd had enough. Without waiting for a response, Chad turned his back and walked away, muttering something under his breath. Savannah stood frozen for a moment, feeling the humiliation wash over her. The sleek luxury cars around her seemed to mock her, each one a reminder of the world she wasn't part of, no matter how hard she worked. As she turned to leave, her mind wandered back to Trent. He'd been the one who had promised her everything. They'd been inseparable once. But when things started to get tough, he'd left without a word. He didn't even say goodbye. He disappeared into a life of wealth, never looking back at the woman who had supported him through it all. But now, as she reached the door, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from an unknown number. "Are you still struggling with that truck, Savannah?" Her heart skipped. She knew that number. Trent. He was back in town. Before she could even process the message, a voice cut through the air. "Ma'am, I'm gonna have to ask you to leave. We don't have time for your nonsense." Chad's voice again, and this time it was laced with scorn. Savannah didn't respond. She just turned and walked out, her head held high, even as the weight of his words pushed her down. She had no intention of coming back to Holston Motors. Not after today. But as she got into her truck and slammed the door, a new thought emerged in her mind. Trent was back. The man who had once been her whole world was back, and now it was time to see just how much had changed. Because Savannah had no intention of staying in the same place forever, not anymore. As the engine sputtered to life, Savannah glanced in the rear-view mirror at Holston Motors one last time. Little did she know, the next day her world was about to be turned upside down. The next morning, Savannah awoke early, the sun just beginning to peek through the cracks in the blinds of her small apartment. Her mind was racing. She hadn't been able to shake off what had happened the day before. The sting of humiliation still lingered, but deeper than that was the feeling of being ignored, being invisible. She had worked too hard for too long to be dismissed like that by someone who didn't even know her story. She stared at her phone for a moment, her fingers hovering over the message Trent had sent. He was back in town. He had to be. That text. "Are you still struggling with that truck?" Savannah wasn't just a random question. He knew exactly what he was doing. But why? Was this a way of trying to make amends? A guilt-driven check-in after all these years? Or was this another one of his power plays, reminding her of the world he now belonged to, the world she would never be a part of? She didn't know what to think, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to let him walk all over her again. If Trent thought he could come back into her life, flash his wealth, and show her that he had everything she didn't, then he had another thing coming. Savannah wasn't the naive young woman who had once followed him blindly. No, this time she had a plan. By mid-morning, Savannah was at the garage, her hands busy as she worked on a rusty pickup truck that had been brought in by a local farmer. But as she tightened a bolt and wiped the sweat from her brow, she couldn't stop thinking about the text. It was like a storm cloud hovering over her head. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, half expecting another message from Trent, but instead, it was a news alert. She opened the app, and her eyes widened. Trent Sinclair, heir to the Sinclair fortune, spotted in Mon, Georgia, driving a brand new Rolls-Royce. Her stomach twisted. The Rolls-Royce, the very same car she had seen in pictures when he used to post about his new acquisitions. It was the symbol of his success, his world, everything she had never wanted, but had been forced to witness over and over. Savannah felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, confusion, maybe even a little fear. She wasn't ready to face him again, not like this. Not with him flaunting his wealth right in front of her face. But there was a part of her that couldn't ignore it either. What had brought him back to Mon? Why had he reached out to her after all these years? The thought gnawed at her as she finished her work for the day and walked to her truck. She didn't even have time to let it all sink in because another distraction popped up. As she made her way out of the garage, she noticed something strange. A black SUV was parked near the curb, the tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. She shrugged it off, thinking it was probably just another customer. But as she started her truck and pulled onto the road, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She didn't know why, but something told her today wasn't going to be like any other day. She had no way of knowing just how right she was. By the time she had made her way to a small cafe in town, The events of the day had already started to feel surreal. Her phone buzzed again this time. A new message from Trent. "Meet me at Holston Motors in 30 minutes. I have something important to show you." Her heart skipped a beat. Holston Motors, the place where she had been humiliated just the day before. What was Trent up to? What did he want from her now? Savannah hesitated for a moment, weighing her options. She could ignore the message and continue with her life, pretending like nothing had happened. But deep down, she knew she couldn't. Not after everything. Not after the way he had just waltzed back into her life like he owned the place. And so, with a deep breath, she made her decision. She would go. But this time, things were going to be different. She wasn't going to be the same woman who had walked out of that dealership the day before. As she arrived at Holston Motors, Savannah noticed something strange. The dealership, usually calm and quiet, seemed more active than usual. There were people standing around, whispering to each other. A few were taking pictures with their phones, their eyes locked on a gleaming car in the center of the lot. It was a Rolls-Royce, the same one from the news article, the same one she had seen in the headlines. And as Savannah got closer, she saw the familiar figure standing next to it. Trent Sinclair. He was leaning casually against the car, dressed in an expensive suit, his dark hair slicked back and his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. His posture was relaxed, but there was an air of confidence about him that Savannah hadn't seen before. It was as if he had finally become the man he always pretended to be. As he spotted her, his lips curled into a slight smile. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with that same arrogance she remembered now. Savannah stood there, frozen for a moment, her mind struggling to process what Trent had just said. Her gaze locked onto the gleaming Rolls-Royce. It was impossible to ignore the temptation, the luxury of it, the perfection of it. It was everything she had never had and had never wanted, at least not in the way he was offering it. Her heart raced, but she kept her emotions in check. She knew exactly what this was. This was Trent. This was how he operated. He'd always known how to wield his wealth, his status, like a weapon, making people feel small, insignificant, like pawns in his personal game. It wasn't just about the car, it never was. It was about control, about showing her how much power he had, how far he had come while she had stayed stuck in her small town, working her hands raw just to survive. But she wasn't going to let him have that power over her anymore. "I didn't ask for this, Trent," Savannah said, her voice colder than she felt. "I'm not some charity case for you to swoop in and rescue." Trent's expression faltered for a moment, as if he hadn't expected this reaction. He adjusted his sunglasses, then pushed himself off the car and took a step toward her. "You think I'm offering this to make you feel small?" he said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. I'm offering it because I know what you're capable of. You've always had the potential, Savannah. You just don't see it, but I do. And I want to help you realize it." Savannah wanted to laugh. Was this really happening? After everything, after the years of him walking away, pretending she didn't matter, and now he was standing here acting like he was some kind of hero. She had spent too long chasing after him, begging for a future with him, only to watch him leave her behind for a life of luxury she had never fit into. And now he wanted to play the knight in shining armor. "I don't need your help," Savannah replied, her voice steady, but the words burned with the fire of everything she had felt during the years of struggle, of rebuilding herself from nothing. "I don't need your charity, and I don't need your pity." Trent's smile faded as he studied her. There was something different in her eyes now. A a kind of defiance he hadn't seen before, and for the first time it unsettled him. "You've changed," he said quietly. Savannah held his gaze, a challenge in her eyes. "Yeah, I have, and not for the better, but I've survived. I've survived without you, Trent, without anyone. I don't need anyone to give me anything. I've worked for everything I've got." A brief silence passed between them, the tension thick. Trent took a deep breath, looking at her with a mixture of something unreadable admiration, perhaps, or maybe something else he couldn't quite place. For a moment, Savannah thought he might apologize, that he might offer a real reason for why he had left her all those years ago. But instead, he just shook his head. "You think you can do this on your own?" he asked, his voice softer now. "You think you're going to keep fighting forever, just to survive? That's what I used to believe too. But now I see the bigger picture. It doesn't have to be this hard." Savannah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. This wasn't about the Rolls-Royce. It wasn't about the money. It was about power, about control, and about Trent wanting to make her feel like she still needed him. And she wasn't going to fall for it again. "No, Trent," she said firmly. "I've seen the bigger picture, and I know that I don't need you to make it happen. I can build my own future, one that's mine, not yours, not anyone else's." She turned to leave, her boots scraping against the gravel driveway, but Trent called out to her once more. "You think you can just walk away from this?" "From me?" Savannah stopped, her back still turned to him. Her voice was low but strong. "I'm not walking away from anything, Trent. I'm walking toward my own life, and it's one that doesn't involve you." She could hear him behind her, the sound of his footsteps approaching, but she didn't stop. She couldn't afford to. Not anymore. As she reached her truck, she felt a wave of emotions, relief, anger, pride, and something else she couldn't quite name. The Rolls-Royce, the luxury, the glitz of Trent's world, they all seemed so distant now, so irrelevant. All she had ever wanted was respect, a chance to prove herself, to show that she was more than the small-town mechanic with a broken-down truck. But she had learned something important that day. It wasn't the flashy cars or the designer suits that made a person powerful. It was their ability to stand on their own 2 feet and fight for what they believed in. Savannah Briggs wasn't just a mechanic. She wasn't just a woman from a small town. She was a survivor, a fighter, and she wasn't going to let anyone, least of all Trent, define her anymore. She started the engine, the familiar roar of the truck beneath her a comforting sound. As she